The last part of the state government that we'd like to look at and compare with the federal government is the state courts. Again, as we said, each of the 50 states have their own independent sovereign court system. And the reason for that is each state has their own set of laws. And since each state's laws vary slightly from other states' laws, you need a court to interpret your laws. And when we look at the structure of the state court systems, about 2/3 of the state have the three-tier system that we find at the federal government level. 2/3 of the states have the trial courts, which is the first court of original jurisdiction, and then they have an appeals court, which has an appellate jurisdiction, and then they have the court of last resort, which most states call their state Supreme Court. About 1/3 of the states only have a two-tier system. They have a trial court and a state Supreme Court. And in these states, which tend to be the smaller states in population, the Supreme Court will act as both the appellate court and the court of last resort. In these states, generally what happens is if I have a trial and I want to appeal my conviction, I appeal it to a particular member of the Supreme Court who will act as the appellate judge. That judge will make his or her decision, and then if I disagree with that decision, then I can appeal that person's decision to the whole state Supreme Court. Tends to be the states, again, that are smaller, that have less cases a year to deal with, that use the two-tier system. When we look at the state courts, they are really the workhorse of the court systems in this country. At the state level, we have about 100 million cases a year that are dealt with at the state level. Compared with the most recent statistics I can find, about 314,000 cases at the U.S. courts. So the states have many, many more cases. And most cases in this country start in the state courts and stay in the state courts. Next thing is, how do we select judges for these state court systems? As you see on the screen, about 1/4 of the states allow their governors to simply appoint them. Most states elect their judges just like you would elect anybody else. So many states use what we call partisan elections to elect judges. Now, both of these methods, letting the governor appoint judges and letting the people elect the judges, have their advantages and disadvantages. If you let the governor appoint people, then you're going to assume that the governor is going to know really who's qualified to be a judge and who isn't. But you also have the problem that the governor may be appointing somebody simply because of a political favor that person did for him. That could happen. Now, to stop the governor from being able to make political appointments of judges, we have come up with the idea in many states that we let the people elect the judges. And again, the problem with the people electing the judges is that the average voter is not real aware of who he or she are voting for any position, let alone judges. So the people could elect a judge who's very popular and very charismatic, but isn't a good legal person to be a judge. So there are problems with both of these methods. Several states, including Missouri, use a plan that we call the Missouri Plan. And the Missouri Plan is a pretty straightforward plan. And it combines the appointment of judges by the governor with the election by the population. In the Missouri Plan, what we do is the governor will appoint a group of people to be on what we call a judicial commission. When there's a judgeship that needs to be filled, the commission creates a short list of people that they think are eligible. And these judicial commissions are supposed to be as bipartisan as possible. So the judicial commission comes up with a list of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different people who they say these people would make good judges. Then that short list is given to the governor, and the governor has to pick one of those people on the short list. When the governor picks one of those people, that person gets to serve as the judge until the next time there's an election. And at that next election, that person that was appointed by the governor faces a vote of confidence. The people will say, yes, we want this person to continue to be a judge, or no, we don't want this person to continue as a judge. And basically, if a majority of the people in the state or in the region that the judge is serving says, yes, we want to keep him, he gets to serve, continue serving as judge, until the next time there's a judicial election, and that's usually every 2 years or 4 years. And then in 2 years or 4 years, that same judge will face for the vote of confidence. And if a majority of the people say, yes, we still want him to be a judge, he continues to be a judge. But any point in time where the people say, majority of the people say, no, we don't want him to be the judge anymore, then he loses his job, and we start this process all over again. It's called the Missouri Plan or the Nonpartisan Plan. It's a plan, like I said, that several states besides Missouri has adopted. The last thing that I want to look at when we deal with state government is something that we call citizen participation or direct democracy. I want you to think about a situation at the federal level. If you or I, as a citizen of the United States, think we need a new law, or we think the Constitution of the United States needs to be amended, there's very little that we can directly do. We can go to our elected officials, our U.S. senators and U.S. representatives, and ask them to introduce a law that we think we need. Or we can ask our representative in Congress to suggest a constitutional amendment. But we can't do it directly ourselves. Also, we're getting ready to have a presidential election. Let's just say that we elect Mitt Romney to be president. And then about a year after we elect him as president, a majority of the people in the country think we made a mistake and we don't want Mitt Romney anymore. There's nothing that we as citizens can do about that. We elect Mitt Romney or we elect the president for 4 years. Unless the president does something wrong and Congress impeaches him, we, the voters, can't do anything about it. Now, many states give their citizens more direct control over the actions of their government. There are two things called initiative and referendum that states give their citizens. And an initiative is when the citizens of a state start a governmental process like legislative initiative, which allows a private citizen to simply come up with the idea for a law. Constitutional initiative, which we talked a little bit about, is a situation where a citizen comes up with the idea for an amendment to the state constitution. And then the state acts on that suggested amendment. The idea here is that the citizen gets to come up with the idea, not the state legislature. And the way the initiative works is if a citizen decides that they think we should have a new law, they write up a new law, they go out and get petitions signed to get a certain number of people in the state to sign a petition saying they would like to see this law voted on. And after those petitions are gathered, this idea for a law is placed on the ballot. And the people in the state get to vote, yes, we want this new law, or no, we don't want this new law. The governor had nothing to do with directly do with the process, and the state legislature had nothing to do with it. The citizens write the law, and the citizens approve the law. Some states give their citizens what we call constitutional initiative, the same exact thing. A citizen can come up with the idea for a constitutional amendment. They get a certain number of signatures. Then that constitutional amendment is placed on the ballot, and the citizens of that state decide, yes, we want this constitutional amendment, or no, we don't. Gives the citizens of the state some direct control over the legislative and the amendment process in their state. We don't see that at the federal level. Another example of direct democracy that some states give their citizens is something called referendum. And referendum is a little bit different than initiative in that in a referendum, the citizens vote whether or not they want to keep an action that the government has already taken. Let's say the state legislature passes a law and the governor signs that law. A referendum would be when a citizen comes along and says, well, we don't think that law is necessary, or we don't want that law anymore. So in a referendum, the citizens would go out and they would get a certain number of signatures. And if they get a certain number of signatures, we put this referendum, this law, or this action that the government has taken, we put it on the ballot. And the citizens of the state get to vote, yes, we want to keep the government action, the law or the action that the government took stays in effect. Or if a majority of the people vote no, then the law is repealed. Again, there's not a whole lot that the state legislature or the governor can do if the citizens, do a referendum. They're not involved in the process other than the legislators themselves get to vote yes or no. These first two examples of direct democracy, initiative and referendum, give the citizens a lot of power over the legislative process. The third example of direct democracy that some states will give their citizens is something that we call recall power. And as I said, at the federal level, if we elect a president and 2 years later we decide we don't want that president anymore, we, the citizens, can't do anything about it. We are stuck with that president until his 4-year term is over. Many states give their citizens the right to recall elected officials. So in some states, if they elect a governor, and a year after they elect the governor, the citizens start to think, hey, we really don't want this guy to be governor anymore, they can conduct a recall election. And the way a recall works is if citizens think that an elected official in their state should no longer hold that position, they start a petition. If they get a certain number of signatures on the petitions, then there's an election in which the people in the state get to vote, yes, we want to keep this guy as our elected official, or no, we want to remove him from office. Huge amounts of power in the hands of the people. And probably one of the most famous recall elections in recent history was in the state of California, in which the governor, Gray Davis, was elected, and he served 4 years as governor. The people of the state loved him. They loved him so much they re-elected him as governor to a second term. But about a year into his second term, the budget and the state issues started to really deteriorate, and the people in the state of California started a recall petition. They got enough signatures on that petition, and there was an election, a recall election. And the people in the state of California voted to recall Gray Davis. And at that point, they elected a new governor, and that new governor was Arnold Schwarzenegger. And those of us who study politics, and particularly study this recall election in California, in which Schwarzenegger was elected, we call that recall election a total recall. I hesitated a little bit there because that was a joke. Arnold Schwarzenegger played in the movie Total Recall. Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor of California based on a recall election. So it was kind of a joke. Hopefully you're laughing. Hopefully some of you got the joke. But these three examples, initiative, referendum, and recall, give the state citizens a lot of power over what their government will do. We don't see any of these examples of direct democracy at the federal level. Now, some states give their citizens just one of these three powers. Some states give them a couple of them, but not all of them. And some states give their citizens all three of these powers. My understanding is the state of Missouri allows initiative and referendum, but does not allow statewide recall. We can't recall the governor, or we couldn't recall the Secretary of State. Some cities in Missouri have the power to recall local officials like city councilmen or mayors. But as far as statewide recall goes, the state of Missouri does not provide that to its citizens. Now, as we look at these differences between the federal government and the state governments, we have to realize to truly understand how state governments operate, we would have to look at 50 different states, because every single state is organized and operates slightly differently. And again, it's based on the fact that we have a federal form of government where the states are sovereign over many issues, and they can structure themselves how they want to deal with those issues, and then there are issues where the federal government is sovereign.